Mistaken for another patient, a man is declared dead and sent to the morgue. But what happens next causes everyone to burst into tears. The strong smell of disinfectant and the distant sound of machines beeping were the only things that filled the suffocating silence. Santiago tried to open his eyes, but it was as if his eyelids were made of lead. His body felt buried. He tried to move his fingers, his legs, anything, but nothing responded. Panic began to grow inside him. His mind was confused and turbulent, but one thought emerged amid the fog. I'm having sleep paralysis. He tried to calm down. He had heard of it before. It was a state in which a person woke up, but their body remained asleep. That had to be it. It was just a matter of waiting. That's when he heard voices. "Yes, your case is impressive," said a man in a serious, professional voice. "How so?" replied a woman. "He's been in a coma for years. I don't even know how he's still alive." Santiago's heart raced. He wanted to shout, to ask what they were talking about, but his mouth wouldn't move. This didn't make sense. He shook his head violently, desperately trying to remember what had happened. His mind was like a broken mirror, full of loose pieces. Who was he? Where was he? How had he gotten there? But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find the answers. His throat felt tight as if bound by invisible chains. Despair grew inside him. He needed to speak, to say he was there, that he could hear everything. He tried to move his mouth, to push the air out, but nothing happened. His heart pounded. The feeling of being trapped inside his own body was terrifying. He wanted to cry, but he couldn't even do that. The voices of the doctor and nurse continued to echo in the room. They spoke about him as if he weren't there, as if he were just a lifeless body. The thought hit him like an icy wave. Who am I? He tried to remember. He closed his eyes tightly in the darkness in which he was trapped and searched his own mind for something that made sense. Suddenly, an image appeared, the sound of sweet, childish laughter. His chest tightened. Another image. A car coming too fast. Bright lights. His eyes closed, then pain. A lot of pain. The impact made him want to scream again. That was it. It was an accident. He was in a car, but who was with him? The fear grew even more. The child's laughter continued to echo in his head. Who was that child? Where is he now? The memories were loose, jumbled like pieces of a puzzle scattered in the darkness. But there was one thing he did know. He was not alone in that car. Time inside that room was different. It seemed not to pass. Santiago did not know if it was day or night. He couldn't see the sun. He couldn't feel the wind. All he had were the sounds of the hospital, the beeping of machines, hurried footsteps in the hallway, distant voices of doctors and nurses. But none of those sounds mattered. He waited for another sound, something that didn't come. He waited to hear a familiar voice, for someone to call his name, for a warm touch from someone who belonged to him. But all he got was crushing silence and the memories that slowly came back. He remembered people, places, and began to remember his family. At first he tried to calm himself, to convince himself that it was only a matter of time. His family still didn't know he had woken up. Of course, that must be it. Maybe the doctors were still contacting them, explaining that he was alive, that he was responding. He clung to that hope with all his strength, but as the days passed, hope began to turn into doubt. Every time the door to the room opened, his heart beat fast. He held his breath, hoping to hear a familiar name, an emotional cry, a touch on his hands. But it was never for him. It was always a nurse checking the equipment, a doctor taking notes, a worker cleaning the room, and every time the door closed, he felt more alone. The days turned into weeks. He heard other patients receiving visits, families coming in with flowers, kisses, and tears of joy at an improvement. But his door remained empty. He began to wonder if something was wrong. Did his wife know he was alive? Did his daughter, the girl whose laughter still echoed in his mind, still remember him? The pain of loneliness was worse than any physical pain. He tried to convince himself that someone would come, that someone had to come. But deep down, a cruel doubt began to grow inside him. What if no one was waiting for him on the other side? The wait had turned into anguish. No visitors, no news, only the certainty that outside, the world continued without him. He no longer knew how much time had passed. Time seemed blurred. Days blended into nights in a cold, repetitive routine of nurses checking the machines, He felt like he was just another number in that hospital, another occupied bed, another forgotten case. Until that morning when the door to the room opened differently. The footsteps were firm and confident. A doctor entered, accompanied by a nurse. Santiago knew something was wrong even before the man opened his mouth. There was something in his voice, an impatience, a coldness that hurt more than any needle that had ever been stuck in him before. After all this time, he was discharged. His family asked to let him go home, said the doctor in a dry tone, as if he were merely following protocol. Protocol. There's nothing more we can do for him here. Just wait or disconnect him. Santiago was confused. He thought he had misunderstood. How could he be discharged when he couldn't even move? How could his family have asked for it when his family hadn't even shown up? He tried to move, but his body remained a dead weight. The doctor and nurse continued talking while the sound of paper being signed on the chart could be heard. That's it. This is no longer our problem. Those words hit him like a punch in the stomach. He felt a lump in his throat. None of it made sense. How could he be discharged if he didn't have the strength to leave there? How could his family have asked for that if they hadn't even come to see him? Something was very wrong, but no one seemed to care. Why did they want to take him home? He wanted to go home, but he was afraid of what he would find. The nurse next to the doctor looked at Santiago with a little pity, as if he wanted to say something, but he remained silent. The doctor handed him the papers and left the room without further explanation. A few minutes later, he heard more footsteps, this time louder. Santiago felt his body being moved, the bed sliding through the hospital corridors. The sound of the wheels echoed in his mind. He expected to hear the voice of his wife or daughter at any moment. He was already anxious and excited. He tried to focus on the sounds and managed to understand something. 2 employees were walking beside him, pushing his bed and talking in low voices, not imagining that he could hear them. This is the patient who died in the early morning. Santiago felt a chill run through his body. They were taking him to the morgue. Now, the air disappeared from his lungs. Morgue. His heart began to beat fast, and his breathing became heavy. He wanted to scream, but his throat was closed. His voice was too weak to come out. He could only scream in his mind. They think I'm dead. I want to go home. He tried to move his fingers. He tried to do anything to get their attention, but it was as if he were trapped inside his own body. Despair grew with every second. The doors opened and closed as the stretcher continued to move toward what appeared to be the end. The idea of being taken to a morgue, of being treated like a lifeless body, was terrifying. What if no one noticed in time? What if it was already too late? He wanted to cry. He wanted to scream that he was there, that he was alive, but it was useless. He was becoming more and more desperate. It was as if they had already decided that there was no one inside him. The smell of the hospital began to change. The air grew colder. He realized they were leaving from the common corridors. The path where they took the living was no longer the same. He was going to a place from which no one returned. The air was filled with a strong chemical smell that he did not recognize, but that somehow turned his stomach. The atmosphere was cold, much colder than anywhere else in the hospital where they had been. Santiago felt the ice piercing his thin, weak skin, spreading through his bones as if they were pulling him into an abyss. The silence was different. There were no hurried footsteps, no sound of monitors or nurses' conversations in the corridors, only the noise of metal against the floor and the low breathing of those in the room. He desperately wanted to react, but his body did not respond at all. He tried to move a finger, to open his eyes completely, but the weight was too much. He was trapped inside himself while the scene around him unfolded, without anyone noticing that he was still alive. The stretcher stopped, and shortly after he felt a pair of gloved hands touch his chest, pressing lightly as if they were checking something. "All set?" asked a tired male voice, like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "Yes, they can recognize him now. Record the head wound." They were preparing his body for identification. He was lying there like a corpse, ready for someone to confirm his death. His heart raced in his chest so loudly that he almost believed that anyone in the room could hear it, but no one heard it. No one noticed. The touch of the cold gloves moved away, and he felt a thin cloth being pulled close to his face. They were preparing to cover him, to close that chapter, to officially declare him dead. An uncontrollable terror took hold of him. If he didn't do something now, he might never have another chance. Fear burned inside him like fire, and all he could do was feel the despair grow, suffocating him more with every second. Footsteps echoed in the cold room. The coroner was approaching. Santiago heard the slight sound of paper being handled, probably some document, the official confirmation that he was dead. Dead. The word made his head spin. He couldn't accept that. He couldn't be buried alive, forgotten, discarded as if he had never existed. He forced his muscles with all he had. He tried to move his hand, but it felt too heavy. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids remained closed. No, it can't end like this. He forced himself to fight against the darkness, against that weakness that seemed to steal what little remained of him. The coroner leaned over him. Santiago smelled the latex of the glove, felt the warmth of the breath nearby. "Let's get this over with quickly," said the man with indifference. The corner of the white sheet began to be pulled. It was at that moment that Santiago succeeded. It was almost imperceptible, almost nothing, but a finger on his hand trembled. Then a lip clung to that minimal movement with all his strength, as if it were his only chance to escape death. With an effort that seemed to consume his last energy, he let out a weak, hoarse sound, an almost inaudible moan. The sheet stopped. The coroner froze. The air seemed to become too heavy, too dense. Was that the man's voice? It sounded different now. The coroner stood still holding the sheet in his hands. The faint sound that had come out of Santiago's mouth echoed in his head like thunder. He blinked in confusion, trying to understand what had just happened. His heart began to beat faster, and a wave of dread ran through his body. That wasn't possible. The man on the stretcher, the one who was there to be pronounced dead, had moved. Swallowing hard, the coroner took a step back, his eyes wide as if he were seeing something impossible. "He's alive." His voice came out shaky, loud enough for the two assistants in the amphitheater to turn around suddenly. One of the nurses dropped a tray on the floor, the metallic sound echoing in the cold space. The other turned pale as paper and ran toward the stretcher, looking at Santiago's pale face, hoping that this was some kind of mistake. Santiago tried with all his strength to move his lips again. Fear continued to burn inside him, but at that moment, a new emotion overwhelmed him. Hope. They saw him. They knew he was alive. The room, which had been a place of absolute silence, became chaotic. The coroner stumbled backward, trying to reach the phone on the wall. "Call someone. A nurse. A doctor." His voice was filled with desperation. The emergency radio was activated, and in seconds, the sound of hurried footsteps filled the hallway. The amphitheater door flew open, and nurses rushed in, followed by two doctors who looked as confused as they did frightened. "What's going on here?" asked one of the doctors, trying to understand the reason for the commotion. The coroner was still speechless. He pointed to Santiago, who was motionless on the stretcher. "He was sent here, but he's alive." The doctor quickly approached, placed his fingers on Santiago's wrist, and felt for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. "My God," he whispered. More nurses rushed in to hook Santiago up to the machines again, trying to stabilize him. The murmurs in the hallway grew louder. The amphitheater, once a place of silence and farewells, was now filled with agitated voices and looks of astonishment. The noise of the machines filled the room. The nurses ran back and forth trying to stabilize Santiago, while the doctors still seemed confused by the situation. No one understood how a man who had been declared dead was there, breathing, alive. One of the doctors, a gray-haired man with a serious expression, took the folder at the end of the stretcher, and he leafed through the pages carefully. Silence took over the room for a moment. His eyes narrowed, and he frowned as if something didn't make sense. "This can't be right," he muttered, looking over the document once more. The other doctors stopped and looked at him. A nurse approached, concerned. "What's wrong, doctor?" He turned the paper so that the others could see it, and pointed his index finger at the name. "Here, it's not from this body." The air seemed to disappear from the room. One of the nurses, still trying to understand what was happening, leaned in to get a better look. "What do you mean, no?" The doctor turned the page, checked again, and then looked at Santiago lying on the stretcher. This body should be from another patient, the man who died early this morning. Santiago's heart, already racing with fear, seemed to stop. For a second, his mind tried to process those words. Another patient, another man. He shouldn't be there. They shouldn't have taken him to the morgue. The mistake was even bigger than they imagined. The nurse looked at Santiago, and then at the doctor. Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. So they declared him dead by mistake. No one responded. Everyone was too stunned to say anything. The weight of what that meant fell on every person in that room. Santiago wasn't just a patient who had come back to life. He should never have been declared dead. The doctor took a deep breath, ran his hand over his face, and looked at his colleagues. I want this patient's complete file. I want to know everything. He didn't say it, but it was clear that something was wrong, something that went far beyond a simple administrative error. The doctor scanned the papers with an increasingly serious expression. His eyes scanned the lines, looking for an explanation, something that made sense. But nothing did. The silence in the room was so heavy that even the sound of the heart monitors seemed distant. He turned another page, analyzed one of the tests, and suddenly stopped. His eyes widened, and his breathing slowed. This can't be possible. The other doctors and nurses looked at each other. One of the nurses, a woman with a tired face, approached and tried to look over his shoulder. What's going on, doctor? He didn't answer. He immediately took another test, checked the numbers, the graphs, the medical records. His trembling hand held the paper tightly, as if he were holding a truth he did not want to accept. Finally, he looked up and saw Santiago lying motionless on the stretcher. He also had a death certificate, but he was not brain dead. He was still alive. The nurse opened her eyes in surprise. What? The doctor showed her the folder, pointing to the reports. Look at this. The tests show he was in a coma, but his brain activity was always normal. There was no serious malfunction. She turned the pages until she reached another document. Her expression became even more serious. It says here that he was receiving regular doses of a very strong sedative. The nurse frowned. But if he was in a coma, why did they need to give him sedatives? The doctor looked at her, and the answer was obvious. Exactly. The impact of those words fell on everyone like an invisible weight. Santiago was alive. He had always been. But someone, for some reason, had kept him asleep for years. And worse, someone had signed a document saying he was dead, even though there was no sign of death. The nurse walked away, feeling a chill run down her spine. Was this a mistake? She didn't finish the sentence. It wasn't necessary. What seemed like a simple mistake was turning into something much bigger. Someone, at some point, had decided that Santiago should no longer exist. But now he was there, and the truth was beginning to come to light. The hospital was in chaos. The murmur that began in the morgue soon spread through the corridors, growing like wildfire. Nurses ran around. Doctors looked at each other in confusion. Files were hurriedly reviewed. But no one could explain how a man declared dead was there, breathing, trying to move. Santiago, still weak, felt the noise around him like a distant whirlwind. He didn't understand everything that was happening, but he knew that this was the moment. They were looking at him. He had returned. The stretcher was pushed hurriedly out of the morgue, the wheels squeaking on the smooth floor as the nurses made their way through the hospital. The frightened looks of the employees were directed at him, but no one stopped to comfort him. No one saw him as a patient who needed help. He was still a mistake, a problem to be solved. Fear grew inside him like a tight knot in his chest. They would return him to that cold place. Somehow they would still make him disappear. That was when he heard a different voice amid the chaos. Stop! He needs care. The voice was firm, but it had something that no other voice there had: humanity. A young nurse approached the stretcher, pushing the others aside. Her face was tense, her eyes full of urgency. She took Santiago's trembling hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. Hold my hand. You're alive. Fight. Those words pierced Santiago like a flame. No one had ever said that to him before. No one there spoke to him, only about him. But that woman saw something the others ignored. She saw a man, not a mistake. He tried to squeeze her hand back. His finger moved a little, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. The nurse smiled, as if she had just witnessed a miracle. Santiago didn't know who she was, but he felt that her voice was his anchor. His chest rose and fell irregularly, but he was breathing. He was there. Santiago felt the world around him begin to fade again. His body was exhausted. His mind struggled to stay awake, but the darkness pulled him in. The last thing he felt before losing consciousness was the warmth of the nurse's hand, soul holding his. Then everything went dark. Night fell over the hospital, and silence filled the hallways. But suddenly, an alarm sounded. The sharp sound echoed through the building, waking the nurses and doctors on duty. The heart monitor in Santiago's room was flashing with altered numbers. The brainwave graph showed something unexpected. He was reacting. Hurried footsteps filled the hallway. Voices rang out in urgent calls. Code Blue. We need a team here now. The doors flew open, and in seconds the room was filled with doctors and nurses surrounding Santiago. They adjusted cables, checked the equipment, trying to understand what was happening. His heart was beating fast. His previously immobile muscles began to contract slightly. His chest rose and fell irregularly, as if he were struggling to breathe on his own for the first time in a long time. "He's coming back," whispered an astonished nurse, ran to the side of the bed, taking Santiago's hand again. "Come on, Santiago. Listen to me. You can do it." Then suddenly his eyes opened. The bright light in the room blinded him for a few seconds. Everything seemed blurry. He blinked several times, trying to understand where he was. His mind was spinning. His heart was racing. The voices around him were confusing. Words mixed together. Unfamiliar faces. His body felt heavy, but this time he could move. A doctor leaned over him. "Santiago, can you hear me?" He blinked again. His lips were dry, his throat burning. With effort, he managed to open his mouth. The room fell silent when his voice came out hoarse, weak, but full of deep pain. "Where is my family?" The air seemed to disappear from the room. The doctors looked at each other. No one knew what to say. The silence was worse than any answer. Something was wrong, something much worse than he could imagine. Santiago felt the crushing silence around him. His question still echoed in the room. Where was his family? Why was no one answering? His vision was still blurry, but he could see the looks exchanged between the doctors, their tense faces, the way they avoided looking at him. Fear grew inside him like a wave about to crash. It was then that he felt a soft touch on his hand. He turned his head with effort and saw Alma beside him. Her face did not hide her concern, but she also had something that the others did not have: compassion. She took a deep breath before speaking, as if choosing her words carefully so as not to hurt him further. "Santiago," her voice was low, almost a whisper, "you've been in a coma for almost 4 years." The sentence hit him like a blow. He blinked several times, trying to absorb those words, but his brain refused to accept them. 4 years. 4 years. His chest rose and fell rapidly. His breathing became irregular. "No, it can't be." His voice trembled. His throat was dry. This is a mistake." Alma squeezed his hand, as if to bring him back to reality. "I know it's difficult, but it's the truth." Santiago felt a chill run through his body, a despair taking hold of him. His mind began to race in different directions. His wife, his daughter, where were they? Did they wait for him? Did they still love him? Did they remember him? What had happened in all these years? His eyes filled with tears. The weight of the loss, of the time stolen from the life that had gone on without him, was unbearable. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to push away the pain, but there was no escape. When he opened them again, he looked at Alma desperately. "My wife, where is Camila?" His voice came out broken, full of fear. "She knows I'm here." Silence filled the room. No doctor responded. Immediately, eyes met. Some looked away. Others seemed unsure. No one wanted to be the first to speak. "I want to see her. I want to talk to her now." Alma, who was still by his side, squeezed his hand. She felt that touch was not one of relief, nor of comfort, but of pity. Santiago's voice was low, as if he were afraid of hurting her more. He looked at the nurse, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "Where is she? Why won't anyone answer me?" The doctor, holding the chart with his records, sighed, ran his hand over his forehead, and whispered to Alma, "You have to know." Alma hesitated for a moment, but then looked directly into Santiago's eyes. "Camila, we believe it was she who signed your death certificate. We found a paper she sent by computer ordering that the machines be disconnected, and since no one had visited you in years, the air disappeared from your lungs. What? At the last moment before transferring you, there was confusion with the papers? He had been discharged at the request of the family, but the nurses received a death certificate, and she, Santiago felt as if he had been punched in the gut. Camila, his wife, the woman he loved, had accepted that he was dead. How was that possible? He blinked, trying to understand. No, it can't be her. She would never do that. Alma seemed to hesitate, but completed her name. It's on the papers. She was the one who authorized it. Santiago felt his eyes fill with tears. Camila had left him. He didn't know why. He didn't know how. But what had been just fear before now turned into a deep emptiness. If she signed it, then maybe to her, he really was dead. He wanted to believe that it was a mistake, that somehow it was all part of the confusion at the hospital. But if she had really signed it, it meant that to her, he was really dead. I want to see the papers. His voice was shaky, but firm. The doctors exchanged uncertain glances. Alma was the only one who stayed by his side, holding his hand as if she knew what was going to happen. The doctor with the folder sighed and signaled to one of the nurses. She hesitated for a moment, but then hurried out of the room. The silence that followed was worse than any answer. Every second seemed like an eternity. Then the door opened again, and the nurse returned with a folder of documents. She walked up to the doctor and handed him the papers without saying a word. The doctor looked through them carefully until he stopped at a specific page. He analyzed it for a moment, took a deep breath, and handed the paper to Santiago. "Here it is," Alma said, helping him hold the sheet so he could read it. His eyes scanned the page anxiously, desperate to find Camila's name, and then he saw it. Her name was there, but something was wrong. His heart beat faster. He looked more closely at the sheet. It looked official. All the information was filled in, but what caught his attention was one detail. Camila's name was written by the hospital system. There was no signature. Santiago blinked in confusion. This isn't signed, doctor." The doctor looked at him, not understanding immediately. Santiago tried to lift his hand a little, pointing with difficulty. "It's her name, but she didn't sign it. This was generated on the computer." The room fell silent. Alma leaned over, analyzing the paper along with the others. "You're right. There should be a signature here, but only her name is written." The doctor frowned, took the other documents from the folder, and began to compare them. "This doesn't make sense. If Camila was the one who authorized it, why didn't she sign it?" Santiago felt a mixture of relief and fear at the same time. Relief because maybe Camila hadn't given up on him, but fear because if it wasn't her, then who declared her death? And worse, why? Santiago felt his chest tighten, as if a huge weight were on it. The document still trembled in his weak hands, and the truth was a direct blow to his soul. All that time, he waited every day in that hospital, every minute of loneliness, believing that someone would come, that Camila would appear with tears in her eyes, holding his hand, and telling him that she never gave up on him, that his daughter would run to his bed crying with happiness, calling him Dad, that his brother would walk through the door with a look of relief, telling him that he fought for him. But no one came, not a hug, not a word, not a glance. He remembered every moment he spent in that cold room, listening to the sound of doors opening in the hallway and holding his breath, hoping it would be his family. But the door never opened for him. He waited for birthdays. He waited for Christmas. He waited for any sign that he still existed for someone out there. But the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and the only company he had was the suffocating tyrants. The pain in his chest was different now. It wasn't just sadness, it was abandonment. They had forgotten him, left him in a bed, treated him like a burden, a number, a patient that no one else wanted to visit. He closed his eyes and tried to remember his daughter's face. Would she still remember him? His voice, his bedtime stories, his scent. Would they remain in her memory? Or after so long, had he become just a shadow, a memory erased by another life that went on without him? He swallowed hard and looked at Alma, who was still by his side, holding his hand as if she understood the pain he was feeling. No one came. His voice came out weak, and he felt his eyes sting. All these years, I was waiting, and no one came. Alma didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were filled with tears because she knew there was no way to ease that pain. I'm so sorry. Santiago took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears, but he couldn't. They came out silently, heavy, laden with everything he had lost. He didn't just lose 4 years. He lost his family. The silence that remained in the room after his tears was more cruel than any words. He didn't want to believe that his wife and daughter had abandoned him completely. At some point, someone must have gone to see him, even if only once. With a weak, almost pleading voice, he looked at Alma and asked, "No one? No one ever came?" The nurse hesitated. Daughter had completely abandoned him. At some point, someone must have come to see him, even if only once. With a weak, almost pleading voice, he looked at Alma and asked, "No one? No one ever came? Not even once?" The nurse hesitated. Her gaze showed that she wanted to find a way to ease that pain, but there was no way. Even so, she took a deep breath and replied carefully, "Your brother, Esteban." Santiago blinked in surprise. "Esteban?" Alma nodded. "He came right after you went into a coma, but after that, he never came back." Santiago's heart beat fast. He remembered his brother, the conversations they had before the accident. Esteban was family. He always had been. So why did he never come back if he really cared? Why did he disappear? He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find an explanation that made sense. Maybe it was difficult for him. Maybe it hurt too much to see his own brother tied to a bed, with no guarantee that he would wake up. But then a doubt began to grow inside him. A concern he couldn't get out of his head. If Esteban came at the beginning and never came back, was it because he couldn't, or because he didn't want to? Santiago opened his eyes again and looked at Alma. This doesn't make sense. He left me here and disappeared. The nurse didn't know how to respond, but deep down, Santiago already knew that this was a question he had to answer himself. He needed to find Esteban. He had to discover the truth. He looked around the room. He had been there too long. If he stayed waiting for answers, they would never come. He had to get out of there. He had to see with his own eyes what had happened outside. Alma noticed his determined gaze. "You can't go out like that," she said worriedly. Santiago turned his face toward her, his eyes still weak but filled with something new, resistance. "If I stay, I'm going to spend the rest of my life without knowing what happened to me." She bit her lip uneasily and looked toward the door, then at the equipment connected to him. The hospital wouldn't let him leave so easily. They wanted him to stay there, quiet, accepting everything they told him, as if he had never been buried alive inside his coma. For a moment, Alma was silent. Then she took a deep breath. "I'm going to help you." Santiago looked at her in surprise. "You would do that?" She took his hand and spoke firmly. "You don't deserve to be trapped here. You have a daughter out there. If there's a chance to get your life back, you have to try." The plan began that same night. Alma waited for the time when the hallways were emptiest. She turned off the monitors little by little so as not to attract attention. She brought him normal clothes and helped him put them on. Santiago felt weak, but his will was stronger than any weakness. When everything was ready, she looked him in the eyes one last time. "You can do it." Santiago took a deep breath, and for the first time in 4 years, he put his feet on the ground. His body trembled. His muscles ached as if he were being stabbed from within, but he wasn't going to give up. With difficulty, he took the first step, then another. Each step was like crossing an abyss, but he kept going. His will was stronger than any pain. With Alma's support, he crossed the hallway without being seen. The elevator slowly descended to the ground floor. When the door opened, the cool night air hit his face. He looked at the hospital exit, at the city outside, and knew there was no turning back. With trembling legs but a determined heart, Santiago walked through the door and stepped into the world that had continued without him for 4 years. The cold night wind hit Santiago's face. The smell was different. The air felt heavier, charged with something he couldn't explain. He looked around, trying to recognize the streets, the buildings, anything that gave him a sense of familiarity, but everything looked strange. With his legs still weak, he began to walk, feeling each step like a challenge. The sidewalks had new businesses, signs he had never seen before. Some stores that used to be crowded with people were now closed, covered in dust and abandonment. Others he didn't recognize shone with modern advertisements. The city had moved on without him. He passed by some people, hoping that someone would look at him with familiarity, that someone would stop and say, "Santiago, you're back." But no one recognized him. Faces passed him by as if he were just another stranger in the crowd. His chest tightened. He stopped in front of a cafe he used to go to with Camila. The place was still there, but the name on the facade was different. The owner, a man who always greeted him with a warm smile, was no longer behind the counter. In his place, a young woman served customers without imagining that the man, standing on the sidewalk, had once been part of that neighborhood. He kept walking, looking at every corner, every wall, every face, but nothing was the same. His world had changed. He was a ghost in his own life. The pain grew inside him, spreading through every part of his body. He didn't know what was worse, having lost 4 years or realizing that even though he had returned, there might no longer be a place for him there. But there was still one thing left: his house, his home. If there was one thing that couldn't have changed, it was that place. He turned the last corner and felt his heart race. There was his house, the same facade, Clara, the same balcony where he used to sit and play with his daughter. For a second, he felt relief. Maybe everything was still in its place. Maybe Camila and Valentina were inside waiting for him, not knowing he was back. But then he saw it. The windows had different curtains. There was an unfamiliar car in the garage. The garden he used to tend on Sundays now had flowers he had never planted. Something was wrong, very wrong. He crossed the street slowly, his chest tight and his breathing heavy. He stopped in front of the gate, his legs feeling weak. Before he could gather the courage to knock, the front door opened and a woman came out carrying a small child in her arms. It wasn't Camila. The child looked at Santiago curiously, not recognizing the man standing there looking at his house, as if he were a ghost. The ground disappeared beneath his feet. Another family lived there. Santiago brought a hand to his forehead, as if trying to organize his thoughts. This didn't make sense. Sam, and his life. Everything he had built was in there, but not for him, for those people. He tried to swallow the lump in his throat, but his voice came out shaky when he asked, "Camila, does she live here?" The woman looked at him with confusion. "Camila? No, sir. We bought this house more than 2 years ago." The answer was like a blow. 2 years. That meant Camila had sold the house. She had moved on. Everything that had once belonged to him no longer existed. The woman noticed that there was something strange about this man, that his eyes were full of pain, as if he had just lost everything. "Are you all right, sir?" But Santiago couldn't answer. He just took a step back, then another, and turned away, feeling his chest break inside. He no longer had a home. He no longer had anything. Santiago walked aimlessly, feeling the weight of reality crush him with every step. The world around him seemed the same, but nothing belonged to him anymore. His house, his family, everything he once called home was now just a memory. He needed answers. He needed to know where Camila was. Where was his daughter? That's when he saw a familiar face on the corner. A gray-haired man was closing the door of an old house. Santiago's heart beat fast. It was Mr. Ramiro, the neighbor who lived there. For years he had always chatted with him on the sidewalk. He had watched Valentina grow up. With uncertain steps, he approached. "Mr. Ramiro, it's me, Santiago." The man looked up and froze. His eyes widened and his mouth opened, but no words came out. He seemed to have seen a ghost. "It can't be," he murmured, taking a step back. This is impossible." Santiago felt a lump in his throat. "I know it sounds crazy, but I'm here. I never died in the hospital. There was a mistake." But Ramiro remained pale, staring at him as if he were still trying to understand what he was seeing. "My God, I went to your wake." Santiago felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The confirmation came out of his neighbor's mouth like a knife stabbing deeper into his soul. They held a wake for him. They cried for him. They buried him. Breathing heavily, he grabbed Mr. Ramiro's arm. "Camila, where is my wife? Where is my daughter?" The man lowered his head. His silence was the worst answer. "Please tell me. I need to know." Ramiro took a deep breath as if trying to find the right words. But in the end, he just blurted out what he had to say. Camila remarried. Santiago's world collapsed. He felt like he couldn't breathe. His legs were weakening. His heart was beating too fast. His wife, the woman who promised to wait for him, had moved on with another man. His eyes filled with tears. "And my daughter?" Ramiro looked at him with pity. "She also thinks you're dead." Santiago couldn't speak anymore. His body was there, but his soul felt broken. He no longer had a home. He no longer had a wife. He no name for the world. He no longer existed. But Valentina was still there, and for her sake, he had to keep going. Santiago felt his blood run cold. The air around him became too heavy, as if the world had suddenly gone dark. He tried to process everything he had just heard, but his mind refused to accept it. Camila had remarried. Valentina believed he was dead. His name had been erased from his own life, but there was still something worse. If they really held a wake for him, then there was a grave with his name on it. His feet began to move before he even realized it. Despair overwhelmed him, and suddenly he was running. Mr. Ramiro called out to him in alarm, but Santiago didn't stop. The cemetery was a few blocks away. He knew that road. He had traveled it before, but he never imagined that one day he would do so to see his own grave. The cold wind cut into his face, but he didn't feel it. His heart was beating so hard that it hurt. When the iron gates appeared in front of him, he stopped for a moment. The silence inside was different, heavy, as if time itself had stopped. He felt a hand touch his shoulder. It was Ramiro, who had run after him. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Santiago didn't answer. He just kept walking. His steps were hurried, but his mind was elsewhere. He tried to convince himself that he would find nothing. Maybe the neighbor was wrong. Maybe it was all a big mistake. But deep down, he knew the truth. The aisles between the graves were narrow, and with each name engraved on the tombstones, his chest tightened more. Then he saw it. His body froze. His eyes widened. His legs weakened, and he felt like he could collapse right there in front of a cold stone tombstone. His name engraved on it, his photo, his date of birth, and the date of his death, almost 4 years ago. He felt like he couldn't breathe. His stomach churned, and his head spun. "My God," Ramiro murmured, looking at the tombstone next to him. Santiago fell to his knees. The world around him seemed to disappear at that moment. The only thing that existed was that piece of stone saying that he was dead. But he was there, alive. He ran his trembling fingers over the photo, over his name, trying to understand how it was possible. They really buried me. A tear rolled down his face. He didn't know if it was anger, pain, or despair, maybe all at the same time. They killed me. The truth was now impossible to ignore. To the world, he no longer existed, but he was there, and he was going to find out who did this to him. Santiago remained kneeling in front of the tombstone, unable to move. The cold wind blew through him, but nothing could shake him from his state. His eyes were fixed on the name engraved on the stone. His name, the one he had carried all his life, the one his parents had chosen with love, the one Camila whispered when she told him she loved him, the one Valentina pronounced with joy when she ran into his arms. Now that name was there, trapped in a grave as if his story had ended. A tear slid slowly down his face, followed by another and another. He tried to hold back the tears, tried to be strong, but how could he stop the pain of seeing his own existence erased? He felt empty inside, as if his soul had been torn out. He wanted to scream, but he had no strength. His voice was stuck in his throat, drowned out by despair. Mr. Ramiro knelt beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. "Son, I don't know what to say." Santiago closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find something inside himself that was still intact, but all he felt was emptiness. "They really forgot me," he said in a low voice, almost a whisper. Ramiro squeezed his shoulder gently. "Don't say that. Maybe they didn't know either." Santiago opened his eyes and looked at the dark sky. His daughter Valentina, did he still mean anything to her? Would her face light up when she saw him after so long? When she saw him, or would he now be just a distant memory, something that life had taken away? He ran his hand over his face, wiping away the tears with difficulty. How can I recover a life that has already been buried? Ramiro sighed, not knowing how to respond. Santiago lowered his head, took a deep breath, and tried to gather what little was left of himself. He had lost everything, but he still had something left. His daughter, Valentina. He ran his hands over his face, trying to contain his despair. How can I just show up now? How can I look at my daughter after all this? Ramiro put a hand on his shoulder and spoke firmly. Because you're still her father. Santiago raised his head, his eyes still full of tears. What if she doesn't recognize me? What if it's too late? Ramiro took a deep breath. There's only one way to find out. Santiago knew he was right. The fear didn't matter. The pain didn't matter. Valentina was still there, and he had to see her, even if it was for the last time. He ran his hands over his face, trying to gather his thoughts, but all he felt was fear. Fear of being rejected. Fear of being nothing to the daughter he loved so much. Ramiro watched him silently, as if waiting for the decision that had already been made inside him. You're going to see her. Santiago took a deep breath. I have to do it. The neighbor nodded, understanding the pain in his words. But I can't just show up in front of her. No. Now Ramiro understood. Look at her from afar. Santiago looked at him, and for the first time, he felt a small glimmer of hope. No matter what happened next, he had to see her, even if only for a moment, even if from afar, even if she still saw him as a ghost, because at that moment, seeing Valentina was the only thing keeping him alive. Santiago spent the night awake, sitting on the small sofa in Mr. Ramiro's house, his mind full of memories and doubts. He tried to close his eyes several times, but every time he did, he saw Valentina's face as he remembered it, a smiling girl with loose hair who ran into his arms every time he came home. But now, she was no longer that girl. She had grown up. She had lived 4 years without him. Did she still exist in his memory? The next morning, Ramiro returned with the information he had been waiting for. Valentina was studying at a school a few blocks away. Every day at the end of the afternoon, she would leave through the main gate accompanied by other children. Santiago felt his heart beat faster. The opportunity to see her, to look at her face, was right in front of him. Shortly before dismissal time, he walked toward the school, keeping himself hidden among streets that seemed increasingly strange to him. When he reached the side wall of the school, he stopped. From the other side came children's voices, laughter, games, everything so close but at the same time so far away. Carefully, he approached the fence and looked through the gaps. Then his world stopped. There she was. Valentina came out of the building, holding hands with a friend, her hair tied back in a ponytail, wearing her blue and white uniform. It looked a little big for her slim body, but she walked lightly, with the innocent joy of a girl who has no idea that on the other side of the street, someone is fighting not to break down. Santiago held his breath. His chest ached in a way he couldn't explain. 4 years had passed. She was taller. Her face was different, but she was still his daughter, his Valentina. He wanted to run to her, call her name, take her little hands, and tell her he never wanted to leave, but fear paralyzed him. What if she didn't recognize him? What if she ran away? What if she cried in fear of a stranger claiming to be her father? Anger justice tightened his throat, but he didn't look away. He would stay there until she disappeared among the children, and he could no longer see her. At least that way he would be sure that she was okay, that even without him, she was living. But then, without warning, Valentina stopped. She looked around as if she had sensed something, as if somehow she knew that someone across the street was there for her. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know if he should run or hide, but something stronger than fear pushed him forward. For 4 years, he had dreamed of this moment. 4 years without hearing her voice, without feeling her arms around him. If he didn't speak now, he might never have another chance. He swallowed hard, his chest trembling, and then, without realizing it, his voice came out. Valentina was almost a whisper, so low that it could have been lost in the noise of the cars and the children's laughter, but it wasn't lost on the girl. She stopped, her whole body tensed. Santiago held his breath. She heard him. She saw when her little hand let go of her friend's, when her eyes, which had been distracted before, suddenly filled with something she couldn't understand. Confusion, fear, hope. Slowly, as if time had slowed down, her eyes met his, and in that instant, everything stopped. The noise around them disappeared. The cars vanished. The voices faded away, became distant. Only that gaze existed. Santiago felt a lump in his throat. She had grown so much, but those eyes were the same. The eyes of the girl he rocked to sleep, who laughed loudly when he lifted her up in his arms and spun her around in the air. His daughter's eyes. But would she recognize him? Or was he just a stranger calling her name in the middle of the street? But then her voice came. "Daddy," she whispered, a fragile whisper, almost as if she were afraid that if she spoke, he would disappear again. But that single word broke down all the barriers, all the walls that time had built between them. Santiago felt tears burning in his eyes. A sob escaped from his throat. Valentina couldn't say anything else. The words left her, because nothing she said would be enough to explain what she was feeling at that moment. Valentina kept looking at him, her eyes shining with tears that refused to fall. She seemed motionless, as if her mind was trying to understand the impossible. But then, suddenly, as if something inside her was released, she dropped her backpack on the ground and ran. Santiago barely had time to react before he felt her small body crash into him, her arms wrapped around him tightly, as if she was afraid he would disappear again. He felt her warmth, the smell of children's shampoo in her hair. Dad cried against her chest, sobbing loudly without restraint, without fear of appearing fragile. Santiago closed his eyes and hugged her with all his strength, his face in her hair, feeling the tears running down his own face. "I'm here, daughter. Daddy's back," Valentina cried uncontrollably, clinging to him as if she would never let go. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. The lost time, the years away, the pain, everything disappeared because there, in that embrace, Santiago felt that for the first time since he woke up, he was truly alive. Santiago held Valentina in his arms, as if his own life depended on that embrace. Her body trembled against his. Her sobs came out uncontrollably, and he felt the pain, sadness, and fear mixed in with that desperate crying. He closed his eyes, feeling the tears run down his face. After everything that had happened, after 4 years of darkness and abandonment, he was there with her. "Daddy's back," he whispered, hugging her tighter, as if he wanted to make up for every lost second. Valentina took his face in her small hands, looking at him through her tears. "I thought I would never see you again. Mom said you were in heaven." The pain in Santiago's chest grew even stronger. His daughter grew up believing he was dead. How many times had he cried? How many nights had he slept hugging a photo of her, trying to remember her voice? He ran his hand through her hair and kissed her forehead. "I know, my love, but I'm here now. I'll never leave you again. I promise you, Valentina." She cried even harder and clung to him, but then the moment was interrupted. A voice came from behind them, a voice that Santiago knew very well, but now sounded different, cold, frightened. Santiago's body tensed. He knew it even before he turned around. Camila turned slowly, still holding Valentina. When his eyes met hers, he saw something she hadn't expected. It wasn't just surprise. It was fear. She covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide as if she were seeing something impossible. This can't be happening. Santiago felt a chill run through his body. There was something wrong with the way she looked at him, something beyond shock, something he didn't yet understand, but would soon discover. Her face was pale, her mouth trembling, her eyes filled with tears. But what bothered him was something he didn't expect to see. It wasn't just surprise or excitement. It was fear. The silence between them weighed like a wall. Camila took a step back, as if her body refused to believe what she was seeing. Her voice came out choked, almost without air. "How are you alive?" Santiago's heart beat even harder. She didn't ask where he had been. She didn't ask what had happened. She asked how he was alive, as if somehow she knew he shouldn't be there. Camila covered her face with her hands, and burst into tears. Her body was shaking. The people around them began to stare, murmuring, trying to understand why a woman was crying so desperately in front of a man who, to everyone else, was nothing more than a stranger. Santiago took a step forward, still holding Valentina, and his voice was filled with pain. "You knew." Camila looked up, her red eyes shining with something he couldn't decipher. His voice broke. "You knew I was alive." She shook her head quickly, but without conviction. "Santiago, this doesn't make sense." Santiago closed his eyes for a second, trying to control the emotions that consumed him. His fear, the way she looked at him, everything indicated that there was something much bigger behind this story. Valentina pressed herself against him, confused by the situation, but he held her tightly, as if the only real thing at that moment was the daughter he had almost lost forever. Camila fell to her knees on the floor, sobbing, unable to say anything else. Santiago felt his chest burning. What did they do to her? What did they do to his family? Camila remained on the floor, her shoulders shaking with the weight of her seemingly endless crying. The world around them faded away, the voices of people becoming distant, as if nothing else existed apart from the suffocating pain of that moment. Santiago looked at the woman he once loved more than anything, now broken in front of him, and his heart, already shattered, broke even more with his trembling hands. Camila lifted her tear-stained face and looked at him. There was something in her eyes that made him hold his breath. It wasn't just sadness. It was despair, a deep fear, a terror that made her whole body tremble. Then, as if needing a test, she slowly raised her hand and touched his face, sliding her fingers across his skin in disbelief. "It's not possible," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You were dead." Santiago felt the pain in those words, like a knife stuck in his chest. "I never died, Camila." She shook her head, sobbing even more. No, I saw your body." He was trembling, Esteban. "He showed me the photos." Santiago felt a chill. "What photos?" Camila squeezed her eyes shut as if the memory were a nightmare she was trying to erase. "Photos of your body, of your face." Santiago was unrecognizable. "That's why we buried you in a closed casket." The ground seemed to disappear beneath his feet. Santiago's blood ran cold, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. Esteban, his brother, the only person who went to see him before his death, he was behind it all. He manipulated everything. Santiago clenched his fists tightly, feeling anger grow inside him, mixed with the despair of knowing that someone so close had buried him alive. Camila continued to cry, tears falling without stopping. "My God, Santiago, I buried you. I cried for you every day. I slept hugging the photo they gave me. How is it possible?" Santiago felt his chest tighten. Camila had also been deceived. Her despair was real. Her pain, her grief, it had all been a lie, created by someone who manipulated them. He took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "I'm here. I never died, but someone made sure to erase my existence." Camila sobbed, closing her eyes, feeling the truth crush her chest. It was Esteban. Santiago didn't need to ask. He already knew. His own brother had betrayed him, and now he had to find out why. Esteban, his brother, the only person who was at the hospital after he fell into a coma, the only person who knew he was still alive, the only one who could have planned it all. His whole body trembled. All those years he had tried to understand what had happened, tried to find a reason for being forgotten, for being declared dead, but now it all made sense. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a mistake by the hospital. It was a lie that had been sustained for 4 years. Camila was still kneeling in front of him, her face covered in tears, her eyes reflecting guilt, fear, and a pain that Santiago didn't know if it would ever go away. "He took care of everything," Santiago whispered, her voice breaking. "When they told me you were dead, I couldn't believe it. But Esteban showed up. He brought the documents, the photos, and organized the funeral." Santiago closed his eyes tightly. His brother did everything. He didn't just tell the lie, he made it a reality. Camila swallowed hard, trembling from head to toe. "He told me I had to be strong, that Valentina couldn't see my pain. But now Now I see it." She looked up at him, sobbing. He deceived me. Santiago felt a deep anger rise within him, burning his chest. He trusted Esteban with his life. He never imagined that betrayal would come from someone of his own blood. He clenched his fists, staring at the floor, his mind spinning non-stop. Why did his voice come out low, full of pain? Why did he do this to me? Camila. She shook her head. "I don't know, Santiago, but he was the only person who had access to everything. He convinced us that you would never come back." Santiago took a deep breath, trying to contain the fury growing inside him. He lost 4 years of his life. He lost his family. He was forgotten. And now he knew that someone wanted that to happen. His gaze hardened. If Esteban spent 4 years believing that he was buried, now was the time to show that a dead man had returned, to settle the score. Camila was still trembling, her face pale and her eyes swollen from crying so much. She ran her hands over her face, trying to hold back the tears, but her voice was still shaky when she began to speak. It was one day, not long after everything happened. Esteban showed up at my house. He was serious. He brought a folder full of documents. He said they were the hospital papers, the death certificate, everything official. Santiago clenched his fists. He could imagine the scene clearly. His brother pretending to be devastated, handing over those papers and putting an end to her existence. Camila took a deep breath, trying to control her tears, but it was obvious that reliving it was breaking her again. She hugged me and said she was so sorry, that she wanted to be there to help me move on. Santiago clenched his teeth. "If you believed her." She looked up at him, her eyes full of guilt. "How could I not believe him, Santiago? I saw the photos. She showed me images, horrible images. She said you suffered a lot in the hospital, that your body couldn't take it." Santiago's hands trembled. Esteban faked everything. Camila hugged herself as if trying to protect herself from the memory. "She told me that you wanted me to move on, that you would hate to see me suffer, that Valentina needed me to be strong." Santiago felt a bitter taste in his mouth. "And you moved on." Camila swallowed hard and looked away. "I tried." Santiago felt his chest tighten. He wanted to scream. He wanted answers. He wanted to understand. How was it possible? But deep down, the truth was already clear. Esteban planned everything. He erased Santiago from his own life and took control of what wasn't his. Santiago felt rage growing inside him, like a fire impossible to extinguish. Blood pounded in his temples. His clenched fists trembled. He didn't want to believe it, but all the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Esteban faked his death. His own brother, the person who should have fought for him, decided he didn't deserve to live. Camila wiped her tears with trembling hands, but her gaze no longer showed only guilt, but also pain, the pain of someone who realized too late that he had been deceived. Santiago ran his hands over his face, trying to contain the fury that grew with every word she spoke. While I was rotting away in a hospital bed, he was here. Camila closed her eyes, her face pale. He was the one I thought I needed. He was always there, saying he would do anything to take care of me and Valentina. I was devastated, and he knew it. Now it all made sense. While Santiago was trapped in a coma, abandoned in a hospital like a living dead man, Esteban became the hero of the family. He was the brother Camila cried for. He was the one who made sure Valentina didn't miss her father. He was the one who became necessary, who took a place that should never have been his. Santiago felt his chest burn. He wanted to keep what was mine. Camila didn't answer, but her silence said it all. Santiago took a deep breath, fighting the rage growing inside him. "Tell me the truth, Camila. What else did she do?" She closed her eyes as if she wanted to escape the question, but then, with a trembling voice, she began to speak. "At first, I just wanted to help. At least that's how it seemed." Santiago continued to stare at her without blinking. "Go on, Camila." She ran her hands nervously over her face. After the funeral, he was always around. Every day he would come with something for Valentina. He helped around the house. He took me to sort things out at the bank. Santiago felt a chill and never suspected. She bit her lips, clenching her hands on her knees. Knees. She thought it was care. Santiago had never been like that before, but at that moment, I saw nothing but pain. Sago looked deeply, feeling the weight of the truth he was about to hear. But then Camila nodded, her gaze lost in some painful memory. First it was the gestures. He would take my hand and try to comfort me in a strange way. I said I didn't want it, but he always insisted, saying it was out of love, that he just wanted to see me well. Santiago felt his fists clench, and then Camila swallowed hard. One day he told me he was in love, that he always had been. Santiago felt a wave of fury grow inside him, but he remained silent, waiting for her to finish. I was confused and didn't know how to respond. I told him I couldn't, that I was still in mourning, that I loved you, but he didn't give up. He started showing up even more, helping with Valentina, doing everything he could to prove he could take care of us. Santiago felt nausea rising in his stomach. He wanted to take my place. Camila nodded, closing her eyes, holding back tears. But I never loved him. Santiago never tried to push him away, but he made me feel guilty. He said I had to move on, that you wanted that he was taking care of us because it was the right thing to do. Santiago felt his heavy breathing. He manipulated you. Yes. The silence that followed was suffocating. Camila trembled, and Santiago felt something inside him break forever. It wasn't just the betrayal of a brother who took advantage of the tragedy. Esteban stole his life, stole his family, and put himself in a place that never belonged to him. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he relived the moment when the doctors discovered the mistake, the confusion, the tests, the changed file. At that moment, he hadn't paid attention, but now it all made sense. He remembered the doctor holding the papers, frowning and saying that something was wrong. He saw the file and there was a name there. His blood ran cold. Esteban's name was on the mail. Santiago opened his eyes wide, his breath caught in his throat. It was him. It was Esteban who signed the hospital documents. It was him who was there when no one else showed up. He authorized decisions and manipulated the discharge papers. He was the last person to see him before the world believed he was dead. Santiago ran his hands over his face, trying to control the rage growing inside him. If Esteban could forge papers, he could do much more, but there was still something he needed to understand. Camila, his voice came out heavy. You said Esteban showed you photos of my body. He said I had suffered a lot in the hospital. She nodded, still wiping away her tears. Yes, he said that the doctors did everything they could, but that your body didn't make it. Santiago looked at the floor, his mind spinning in 1,000 directions at once. He had been in a coma for 4 years, but what if it wasn't just the accident? What if someone wanted him to never wake up? His chest rose and fell rapidly. Who was behind the drugs that kept him unconscious? Who made sure he didn't come back? He already knew the answer. Esteban didn't just take him from his own life. He made sure Santiago couldn't fight to get it back. Santiago felt the weight of the truth crushing his chest. Every piece fit together in a cruel way, showing that nothing that happened was an accident. Esteban not only stole his life, but also made sure he never had the chance to get it back. But there was still something he needed to understand. How could he have been in a coma for so long? The accident was serious, yes, but why did his body never react? Before, what kept him trapped in that darkness for 4 years? That's when Alma called, and he answered immediately, his heart racing. Santiago, I discovered something. Her voice sounded distressed, full of urgency. What happened? She hesitated for a moment, as if still trying to gather her thoughts. I went back to the hospital and said I wanted to review your treatment records to understand what had happened. Santiago, I found something that doesn't make sense. He felt his stomach churn. Tell me now, Alma. She took a deep breath. Every 4 days, a nurse gave you a very strong sedative. The silence was suffocating. Santiago felt his body freeze. What do the records say? It was part of your treatment, to help control your condition. But Santiago, that medicine wasn't for someone in your state. It was something that would leave anyone completely unconscious. Santiago gripped the phone tightly, as if he needed something to hold on to. They kept me in a coma, Alma. Her voice heavy with pain. The hospital believed she was just following medical orders, but someone made sure you never woke up. Santiago's chest rose and fell rapidly. Now he understood everything. The accident left him in that bed, but it was the constant doses that kept him trapped in that endless coma. Who signed the authorizations? Alma paused, and Santiago knew the answer before she said it. Esteban. Santiago's world turned upside down. His own brother. He signed the papers, pretending to care for him, when in reality, he was making sure Santiago never opened his eyes. Santiago closed his eyes, his chest burning with rage. He wanted him to die. Alma took a deep breath on the other end of the line. No, Santiago, I didn't want you to die. How could you say that? If I had wanted you dead, I would have done it differently. But he kept you alive long enough for no one to suspect anything, but too weak to fight back. Santiago felt a chill down his spine. Esteban didn't just want him to disappear, he wanted to control him, to decide when and how he would go. Santiago couldn't waste any more time. Every second away from the truth was an insult, a pain that grew and turned into something bigger than he could bear. Esteban destroyed his life, stole years from him, drove his family away, and buried him without remorse. But now he was knocking on his traitor's door, walking fast through the streets with clenched fists, his heart beating fast. His body was still weak, but rage sustained him. Everything he had lost, everything he had suffered, every tear Valentina had shed, every night Camila had spent crying without knowing the truth. It was all Esteban's fault. When he arrived in front of the house, he stood still for a moment, staring at the door as if he could see through it. The house was large and beautiful, full of details that hadn't been there before. Santiago recognized the place. It was the same one he and Camila had once dreamed of buying one day. He had told her he would work hard so they could have a better life. But who had fulfilled that dream? It wasn't him. It was Esteban. His stomach lurched. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A few seconds of silence. Time seemed to stretch out. Then the doorknob turned. The door opened, and Esteban appeared. What Santiago saw made his blood run cold. His brother's face immediately paled. His body tensed. His eyes widened. And the expression that followed was pure terror. "You, Esteban," he said, taking a step back. "You can't be here." Santiago felt a bitter taste in his mouth. He didn't say, "You're alive." He didn't ask, "How?" Because he knew. He knew that Santiago had never died. He knew that someday this could happen. The silence between the two was heavy, as if the air were too thick to breathe. Surprised, Santiago's voice came out firm, but full of pain and hatred. Esteban tried to compose his expression, but the fear was still there, reflected in his eyes. This is some kind of joke." Santiago took a step forward, causing his brother to back away. "A joke?" He laughed, but without a trace of humor. "You buried me, Esteban. But I came back." Esteban swallowed, trying to control himself. "I don't know what you're talking about." Santiago felt his chest burn. "Don't lie to me," he shouted, and Esteban trembled. "I know everything. I know it was you who faked my death. It was you who manipulated Camila. It was you who kept me drugged for years." Esteban looked away for a second, but then raised his head, forcing himself to stand firm. "And what are you going to do now, Santiago? Accuse your own brother after everything that happened? After all this time, do you think anyone will be on your side?" Santiago felt a chill run down his back. "You destroyed my life." Esteban narrowed his eyes. "I gave you a dignified end. I took away the burden you were carrying. I did what I had to do." Santiago felt his heart tighten. He wasn't sorry, not even a little. Esteban's gaze hardened. "You should have stayed where you were, Santiago." Santiago clenched his jaw. "You were wrong. I came back, and now you're going to pay for everything." The silence between them was sharp. The war between them had just begun. Santiago's chest rose and fell heavily, his breathing uncontrolled, his fists trembling with rage. In front of him, Esteban remained motionless, trying to hide his fear, but failing miserably. Sweat dripped from his forehead, his eyes darting from side to side as if looking for a way out. But Santiago wasn't going to let him escape, not this time. Before he could control his own body, he moved forward in a quick movement, grabbed Esteban by the collar of his shirt and pushed him hard against the wall. The blow made a sharp sound. His brother opened his eyes wide, trying to break free, but Santiago held him even tighter. "You killed me!" His voice came out broken, loaded with years of rage, despair, everything they had tied him to. "You made me lose 4 years." Esteban tried to break free, his hands grabbing Santiago's arms, but it was useless. Now he felt the weight of the fury of a man who had returned from hell. "No, it's not like that," Esteban stammered, trying to sound firm, but his voice trembled. "It's not like that." Santiago tightened his grip. "You stole my life. You made my family bury me, and on top of that, you had the nerve to take my place." Esteban gasped, searching for an explanation, but nothing he said would change what he had done. "You don't understand," Santiago murmured, his voice breaking. Santiago clenched his teeth, his gaze burning with hatred. "Then make me understand. Tell me why you did it." Esteban finally stopped resisting. He was silent for a second, then looked away. His expression changed. There was no regret, no guilt, only a truth he had carried all this time. Then, in a low, almost cold voice, he murmured, "Because you had everything." Santiago froze. His heart stopped. For a moment, Esteban finally looked at him, his dark eyes filled with something Santiago had never noticed before. "Envy. You had the perfect wife, the perfect daughter. A life I never had. You didn't see it. You were always the good son, the good husband, the good father, the man everyone respected." Santiago felt the rage boiling even more inside him. "And that gave you the right to bury me alive?" Esteban let out a short, bitter laugh. "You don't understand. I just took what should have been mine." Santiago clenched his teeth, feeling his chest burn. "My life was never yours. My family was never yours." Esteban narrowed his eyes, filled with rage. "But I made her mine. Camila. I needed someone brave. I needed someone, and I was there when you weren't." Santiago felt a lump in his throat. "You erased me. You kept me in a coma." Esteban pushed him away, finally managing to break free, but his body was shaking. "I did what was best for everyone. You were a burden. You were going to remain trapped in that bed, suffering and making others suffer. I freed them from that." Santiago clenched his fists. "You didn't free anyone. You stole my life." The two stared at each other, the silence weighing heavily between them. But now everything was clear. Esteban never felt remorse. He never felt remorse. He built his happiness on Santiago's pain, and in that moment, Santiago knew there was no turning back. His own brother was his worst enemy, and now he would have to pay for everything. Santiago felt his heart beating fast, blood rushing through every part of his body. He discreetly took his cell phone out of his pocket. Despite the rage burning inside him, his fingers pressed the record button. "Say it again, Esteban." His voice came out firm, charged with controlled fury. "Say it so everyone can hear. Say how you stole my life, how you made my family bury me alive." Esteban laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. His mask was beginning to crack. "Do you think anyone will believe you?" he sneered, but the insecurity was clear in his voice. Before Santiago could respond, he heard footsteps behind him, and then a fragile, trembling voice full of something that made him freeze. "Dad." His heart stopped. He turned slowly, and what he saw broke his heart. Valentina was there, her eyes shining with tears, her breath ragged, her little body trembling. Camila had her hands over her mouth, shocked by the scene in front of her. Santiago felt a chill run down his spine. They heard everything. The silence was broken by Valentina's weak voice. "Uncle Esteban," he lied. Her eyes went from Santiago to Esteban, confusion and pain reflected in every part of her little face. Esteban swallowed hard and tried to say something, but Valentina didn't wait. The surprise turned into something bigger: anger, sadness, courage. "You took my dad away from me," she shouted, her voice breaking. Esteban took a step back, his face turning even paler. "Valentina, listen." She wasn't crying. Her little fists clenched. "I cried so much for my dad. I dreamed about him. And you. You knew he was alive all this time." Santiago felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to run and hug her, but his body was paralyzed by the scene. Camila closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, her gaze was different. "I trusted you, Esteban." Her voice was barely a whisper, but full of pain. "I let you into my house, into my life, into my daughter's life, and you did this." Esteban had no way out. Santiago took a deep breath and raised his cell phone, still recording. "Now you're going to tell everything, Esteban. You're going to say what you did at the hospital, how you signed those papers, how you paid to keep me drugged because of this. This doesn't end here." Esteban looked at everyone desperately, searching for a way to escape, but it was too late. But then, in a quick movement, he tried to run. His feet barely touched the ground before the siren of a patrol car echoed in the street. The police were already there. 2 officers got out of the car and approached him with their guns down, but ready to act. "Mr. Esteban, raise your hands." Santiago's brother stood still for a moment, but then he turned around and tried to flee down an alley next to the house. It was useless. The police advanced quickly. One of them grabbed his arm, pulling him back, and the other was already taking out the handcuffs. "No, Esteban, don't struggle. This isn't right. I did it for love." Santiago felt a knot in his stomach when he heard those words. Love. Camila whispered with disbelief in her eyes. Esteban looked at her, his face twisted with despair. "Camila, I did it for you. Don't you understand? I took care of you. When no one else was around, I did what Santiago would never have had the courage to do." Camila shook her head, tears falling. "You destroyed my life." The police pulled Esteban away, placing the handcuffs on his wrists. He didn't scream. "No, Camila. Listen, I did it for us." She looked away. Valentina squeezed Santiago's hand tightly, her tears falling silently. Esteban resisted, trying to fight back, but soon they pushed him into the patrol car. The door closed, and suddenly silence filled the street. Santiago looked at Camila, still trembling, her gaze lost on the ground. Then he looked at Valentina, her eyes red from crying, but still holding his hand tightly. He pulled them both toward him, hugging them with all his strength. Valentina cried against his chest and felt his small body tremble. "It's over," he whispered, closing his eyes. Camila closed her eyes and let a few more tears fall, before finally speaking. "Forgive me." Her voice came out low, broken, full of regret. "I should never have believed him," she continued, sobbing. "I should have fought for you. I should have sensed that something was wrong." Santiago took a long, deep breath. He wondered how Camila hadn't realized how she had accepted his death without question, how she had let Esteban into her life. But now, seeing her there, broken in front of him, he knew it wasn't her fault that she had been deceived. She suffered, crying her loss every day. She lived a grief that seemed real. He could hate her. He could scream. He could say he would never forgive her, but he wouldn't. Hate would get him nowhere. He took a step forward and took her trembling hands. Camila opened her eyes in surprise, but did not pull away. "It's over, Camila." His voice came out firm but tired. "We can't change what happened, but we can move on." Camila let out a loud sob and closed her eyes, shaking her head. "I don't know how to look at you without feeling ashamed." Santiago squeezed her hands. "Look at me now." She hesitated, but then looked up. He watched her for a long time before saying the words that would free her from that pain. "I forgive you." Camila burst into tears, and without thinking, threw herself into his arms. Santiago felt her body tremble against his. He felt the pain come out with every tear she shed. He knew there were still wounds, but there in that embrace, a new beginning was born. He looked at Valentina, who was watching the scene from afar, with her hands clasped and her eyes full of tears. He had waited so long to have his family back, and now they were finally ready to start over. The house that had once been his no longer belonged to him. Another family lived there. Another story was being written in that place, but none of that mattered. Santiago took Valentina's hand on one side and Camila's on the other. They would walk together toward a new home, toward a new life, the life he would regain. Santiago stood at the door of the room, watching Valentina sleep. Her breathing was soft, her hair was scattered on the pillow, her face was peaceful. She was so beautiful, so big, and he wasn't there to see it. His eyes began to burn. He tried to hold back the tears, but it was impossible. 4 years. 4 stolen years. 4 birthdays he didn't celebrate. 4 Christmases without him. 4 years in which Valentina looked up at the sky, perhaps wishing for her dad to come back, not knowing that he was alive, imprisoned, unable to call her. He approached slowly, feeling a lump in his throat. He sat down next to the bed and gently ran his fingers through her hair. How could he have lost so much? How could he have let time slip away like that? But then, in the midst of that whirlwind of feelings, Valentina stirred slightly, opening her eyes slowly. She blinked a few times, still half asleep, until her eyes met his. And then she smiled. "Daddy." Santiago closed his eyes. Of feelings, Valentina moved slightly, slowly opening her eyes. She blinked a few times, sleepy, until her eyes met his, and then she smiled. "Dad." Santiago closed his eyes for a moment, holding back a sob. "I'm here, daughter. I'm here, Valentina." She yawned and turned on her side, taking his hand. "You're going to stay, right?" The lump in Santiago's throat grew even stronger. "I'm never leaving you again." She closed her eyes again, calm, holding his hand as if to make sure he wouldn't disappear. Santiago stood there looking at her, feeling the weight of guilt and the pain of lost years. But he also felt something new, something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He could never get back the years that had passed. He could never see her take her first steps at school. He could never erase the tears she cried because she missed him. He could never go back in time to be the present father she deserved, but he could still be the father she needed. He could still be there for every laugh, every achievement, every fear, and every hug. The past was lost, but the future could still be written. Santiago kissed his daughter's forehead and whispered with a broken voice, "I love you, my love." And in that moment, he realized that he did still have a life to live. Santiago walked through the hospital corridors of the hospital, feeling a lump in his throat, the smell of medicine, the hurried footsteps of the nurses, the distant sound of heart monitors. All of it took him back to those years when he was trapped between life and death, unconscious, forgotten, erased from his own history. But now he was no longer a lost man. Now he had a purpose. When he arrived at the nurse's station, he saw Alma with her back to him, organizing some files. For a moment, he just watched her. If it weren't for her, he would still be there. Maybe they would have taken him to the morgue without ever giving him the chance to return. He took a deep breath and approached her. "I thought I'd never see you again, Alma." She turned around and smiled softly when she saw him. "Santiago." Her voice had a tone of relief. "How are you?" He looked at his own hands, as if he had just realized that he was still there, breathing, living better than ever. She smiled, but there was excitement in her eyes. "I knew what happened to your brother, to your daughter." Santiago nodded and sighed. "It was difficult. It still is. But here I am, and that's already a lot." Alma, living better than ever. She smiled, but there was emotion in her eyes. "I know what happened to your brother, to your daughter." Santiago nodded and sighed. "It was difficult. It still is. But here I am, and that's a lot." Alma looked at him for a moment, then nodded with a sparkle in her eyes. "You're a miracle." Santiago felt a lump in his throat. He thought about everything he had faced, every pain, every loss, but he also thought about he had gained a second chance. He looked at Alma and took her hand gratefully. "Without you, I wouldn't be here." Her eyes moistened, but she smiled. "I only did what was right." Santiago took a deep breath. "I spent a long time looking back, feeling angry about what I lost, about what was taken from me. But now I understand." She frowned curiously. "What is it?" He smiled with the certainty of someone who had finally found his way, that the past was over, that what mattered now is what I can still live for. Alma squeezed his hand gently and let out a soft laugh. "I think you've finally awakened, Santiago." He looked one last time at the hospital corridors, knowing that this place was part of his history, but that it was no longer his home. He turned and walked toward the exit, feeling the sun on his face. The past had marked him, but it would no longer define him. What mattered now was the future. Tom. The cemetery was silent. The cold wind blew gently among the gravestones. Santiago walked slowly, feeling each step as if he were carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. He never imagined that one day he would visit his own grave, but there it was, before his eyes. His name engraved in stone, his photo, his dates, as if he were really gone, as if he had never existed after that day. His knees buckled, and he knelt slowly, running his fingers over the cold marble. It was strange, frightening, but more than anything else, liberating. He felt tears roll down his face. But this time, they were not tears of pain, anger, or sadness. They were tears of farewell. This is not me anymore. That grave represented the man he once was, the man who suffered, who lost, who was forgotten. But Santiago was no longer that man. He was alive, and he would never let anyone erase him again. Valentina approached and took his hand, with her eyes full of tears. "You shouldn't be here, Dad." He looked at his daughter and felt his heart tighten. "No, my love, I shouldn't." Camila stood next to them, wiping away a silent tear. Santiago took a deep breath and ran his hand over the grave one last time, then stood up and looked at his family. They were his life now. They were his present, his future. He took Valentina's hand and Camila's at the same time, feeling their warmth, the certainty that he was no longer alone. Looking at them, he smiled, feeling the weight of the past fade away. "From now on, I'm going to live for us." Valentina squeezed his hand tightly. Camila smiled excitedly. Together, they turned their backs on the grave and moved forward, because life still awaited them. The wind blew gently, ruffling Santiago's hair as he closed his eyes. For a moment he felt the warmth of the sun touch his skin. How long had it been since he had felt that? The simple pleasure of standing there, breathing, feeling life running through his veins. The past was a distant shadow, something they had tried to take from him, but that, against all odds, he had managed to recover. Valentina ran a few steps ahead, laughing, her arms open as if she wanted to embrace the world. Camila watched her daughter with a small, serene smile, an expression that Santiago did not see. For a long time, it was as if everyone had awakened from a nightmare that had lasted too long. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the fresh morning air. There was no more fear, no more anger, only the certainty that he was alive. Camila turned to him with shining eyes, as if she still couldn't believe he was there beside her. "What are you thinking about?" Santiago smiled, watching Valentina play, her laughter filling the air that had once been silent. Camila looked down, for a moment, but he gently took her hand, making her look at him again, but now for real. "I came back to life." She squeezed his hand excitedly. "You're never going to leave us again, right?" He shook his head and looked at his daughter, who ran towards him and threw herself into his arms, laughing. Santiago lifted her off the ground and spun her around, feeling the joy vibrate inside his chest. No, never again. The sun was shining brightly in the sky, and for the first time in years, Santiago looked toward the horizon and saw a future, a real future, without shadows, without pain, just life reborn before him. And this time, he would not waste it. "Now I want to know from you, what would you do in Santiago's place? Would you have the strength to forgive? Do you think you could start over after everything that happened? Comment below, because I really want to know your opinion. And don't forget to activate the bell, so you don't miss out on the next exciting stories that will touch your heart. And since you've come this far, I have a video that has made many people cry and rethink their lives. Click now and get ready for a story that will move you deep inside.